Welcome back, everybody. We're here to do a checkup on an air conditioner that's 24 years old. I'm going to show you what you need to be looking for and what you need to be concerned about on something that is this old. Air conditioners typically get replaced around 12 to 15 years. This one being 24 years old, I'm looking for a few things to see how much longer of life we can get out of it, just to do this homeowner a good service. Watch what I do, watch what I show you, and those little steps that I take to quickly get through this in a very efficient manner. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I'm just looking at the wires here. You can clearly see that it's had a splice done to it. Looking at this unit, there's a couple things I'm gonna just go over. One is, the condition that we can see just from an observation. Like, I'm looking at the disconnect, I'm making sure there's nothing missing in there, like a cover plate. The condenser itself, I want to know what size it is, how old is the unit. All that's valuable information. When we're looking at, the refrigerant, that tells us how old it is. R22 is what we have here. It's a 3-ton. It is a heat pump. Going to the thermostat, I'm just going to drop the temp. Make sure that stays running. Okay, here's the air handlers in the garage. Pretty basic setup. See a lot of these in Florida like this. Flex coming down. Got your supply and return trunk line. Open up that garage. A little bit more light in here. See, they got the little spare filter off to the left hand side. And I'm reading the model number, see what I'm dealing with. Go to my van and I'm going to grab some tools out of here. I don't need the whole toolbox, don't need the whole van inside the garage, so just a couple things. Obviously I need to check the refrigerant. Kind of concerned about that drain line, doesn't seem to be dripping much. Typically I check the air handler, then I work my way to the condenser, but right now, because I've never seen this thing run and it's a new account, I want to check my compression ratio, make sure there's nothing funny. The lines weren't very cold and there's not much water coming out of that drain line. However, it was cool inside the house on a hot day, so that was pretty interesting. So I'm just going to hook up these gauges and I'm going to check that compression ratio. And I'm going to go ahead and check that superheat and subcool value, and kind of do things in reverse order from where I would normally do it. Typically I would start at my indoor unit and then work my way outside. But if I have something serious going on here, then I'm going to better understand what else I'm going to be getting involved with because of the age of this equipment. So I'm going to go ahead and set my manifold up for R22. And as you can see here, we have a head pressure and a suction pressure of 175 and 33 psi. I'm going to go ahead and just clamp our liquid line so we can see what kind of liquid values we're getting from that. Looks like it's 4.6 subcool. And the superheat on this, wow, that's pretty high. 69 degrees superheat, 4.6, 4.7 subcool. So that's not good. The other thing is I got 34 psi and 176 psi. Yeah, these values that is just not good. So it's a pretty high compression ratio and a high superheat and a decent subcool, but everything's kind of indicating a restriction. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and just pull a panel off that air handler. Get my flashlight out of here.
kind of curious to see what we've got going on inside of this air handler. It doesn't look like there's going to be any airflow problems, but I mean, you know, because I have a high superheat, typically a low superheat would indicate a airflow issue. So I'm not expecting to find a dirty coil with that superheat level. You know, typically when we see high superheats, we wind up having a system that's, you know, low on charge. But if I was low on charge, I wouldn't have a high pumping ratio. That pumping ratio is very high. Okay, and you know, you can clearly see that there's some mildew built up into the cabinet. That's all normal. Just, you know, just doing a visual observation here. You know, the blower's running. I don't see anything out of the ordinary indicating that motors have been replaced. That's a factory motor. Looking up here, I don't see anything that's been bypassed. No spare parts, old parts that are left behind. So it looks like this system's ran for a very long time in its original state, not really tampered with. You know, heat strips all look to factory specs. You can tell that the capacitor is not the original. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that bottom panel and look and see, you know, what type of metering device. I know these units pretty well. They all came with expansion valves, TXVs, but you know, that superheat being high and that subcool being the 4.6 value is pretty much looking like it's going to be a metering device. I'm going to get out my 11-in-1. I don't mind making many trips to the truck here. There's always that odd screw that doesn't belong. Well, there shouldn't be a Phillips head screw there. Obviously somebody replaced that screw with a non-factory size screw. Typically you see 1/4 inch hex screws on Lennoxes. Alright, so we can already see ice on that coil. That's an original coil, it looks like. You see that ice on it. And now the whole thing's not iced up. So that's pretty odd. Typically we'll have more ice on it than that. Yeah, that line's not even cold. Pull that filter out. We do need to look at the filter and look at the coil. Got to establish that airflow. Okay, coil is next. That filter doesn't look bad. When we look at this coil, we can, you know, try to stick the camera down there so you can see it, like a bird's eye view type of thing, but I like to use my cell phone to record the image and get my light on it. So and plus if I ever had to like show that video, I have that ability, and so I just stick my cell phone in there and I just record that with the light on, and then I get a better view if those fin plates look damaged or you know, full of debris. So we can look and see what that looks like. I know it's hard to see. I don't have the GoPro, you know, pointing directly at it, but that coil's pretty clean. I mean, minus the mildew, but that's not causing any mechanical issues, which is what I'm looking for. So we obviously have ice, not a good thing. You know, we're gonna obviously do a leak check just because there's a lot of rust. And I think that's, you know, we owe that for this being a 24-year-old unit, because if they do want to repair it, you want to know that we're not making a repair on something that needs more work. So if we're going to make a repair, we need to do everything that's needed to be done here if we're going to try to salvage this thing. Alright, so definitely showing its age, that's for sure. So I'm going to go back to the truck and I'm going to look for my leak detector, and we're going to do a leak check on this. And the moment we do that, then we can go back outside and check some other things. Also, I'm going to go ahead and check the capacitors on this too. Now that I've had it off, I'm just curious here if anything's changed. Those values are still the same, so definitely not getting a whole lot of liquid inside that evaporator coil. So We're going to go ahead and just power everything down. And looking for the electrical panel. It's not in the garage. Probably, yep, it's in the laundry room. We're going to go ahead and just turn off the breakers. That'll de-energize everything. I always like to turn off both of them. That way I don't have to mess with the disconnect in case there's an issue with that box. I don't want to tamper with it if I don't have to. That ice is melting pretty quick. I'm going to grab the leak detector and I'm going to grab my meter and my pliers. Okay, we're going to go ahead and turn the leak detector on. We're going to go ahead and warm it up. Now, while that's warming up, we're going to go ahead and check a couple other things so we can try to make up a little bit of time here. Looks like because of these issues, we're going to spend a little bit more time on this to get a full diagnostic. So while the leak detector is warming up, we're going to go ahead and just check that capacitor. Not really sure what to find here, but these are really easy things to check while you're doing a checkup. We obviously know the motor and compressors are running, so while it's off, taking advantage of that. That's a 5 microfarad capacitor. So we're looking for, you know, plus or minus 10% of that number, or what it suggests is plus or minus 5 or 6%. You know, my rule of thumb is, you know, if you're 10% weak, you definitely need to replace it. All right, so checking out, I know it's hard to see because of that light on the field piece, but I'm reading 3.8 microfarads, 3.84 out of 5, and so it's obviously weak, right? And so that's more than what the nameplate on the capacitor suggests, so it needs to be replaced. Not really surprised. Just go ahead and plug it back in because, you know, we're getting a full report, so we're just going to put everything back the way it was. You know, typically when we have these kind of issues, we just do a full report and just kind of price everything in as one repair. Now that the leak detector is warmed up, we're going to go ahead and just put our probe in there. And I know that we have a bad expansion valve, but like I said, I want to make sure this coil doesn't have a leak on top of it, because if they do say, hey, go ahead and change out the capacitor and change out the expansion valve, we want to make sure that we're not doing all that work on a coil that's also leaking Freon, because it is original, it's 24 years old, and it's rusty. So I'm just going to wave the probe around, and if anything goes off, nothing's gone off yet, then instead of, you know, going for a valve, I would go for an entire evaporator coil with valve. That's how I would pretty much pitch that. And, you know, so far I'm not really finding any leaks, and these are the primary spots where you would see that. And I didn't see any oil on that condenser either, by the way. So, and the refrigerant levels did not indicate that it was low on charge, because if I was low on charge, I would actually have a low subcool, pretty much a 0 subcool. So if my subcool was 0 and my superheat was, you know, where it was at, 70, then that would indicate that I'm low on charge. There's a leak somewhere, and I would spend more time on a leak check. Now that I've changed the sensitivity, I did get a little hit there in that top right corner now a couple of times. So it's got some microscopic leaks, but, you know, that's not a major issue. That valve is a critical point where we're not letting refrigerant get to the coil. So that valve would be the main thing that I would be hitting on if he wants to keep this unit running for, you know, a year or two longer. And so, like I said, we know that we're not low on refrigerant because we had like a 4.6 degree subcool. That's, you know, in a high superheat. So It wasn't like the perfect subcool, but we don't know if this thing was ever charged properly or if it had some loss of refrigerant. But once we put a new valve in it, if we go that route, then we're obviously going to charge the system up properly. And got a little hit back there in that back corner a couple times. You can see that light go off back there. This is small leaks, nothing too major. Like, it's not screaming at me. It's not going off like an arcade game or anything like that. And I'm just going to go to that back side of that evap coil on this side to see if anything goes off. And again, everything's got a couple hits back there, nothing major. And I got it on the high sensitivity too. I always typically work on a larger setting, and then I go to, you know, like that turbo mode, whatever it's called. And if I can't find a leak on the highest setting, then I go to that you know, smaller leak value setting. And if it doesn't find anything there, then, you know, I know there's nothing major there. Now that it's been off for a little bit too, this also allows me to see what my stagnant pressures are. And that's always a good indication too. Like, I'm 125 over 125. For one, I'm equalized. So that says some good things about the compressor. But 125 and 125 on an R22 on a day like today where it's like, you know, mid 80s, that's not bad. So, like I said, that expansion valve is definitely the issue here on this 24-year-old R22. Again, looking inside of here, everything looks pretty standard. You know, the contactor's not even really pitted. I know it looks kind of shadowed there from this angle, but I can see better than the video can show. Everything looks pretty original. That capacitor has obviously been replaced, but who knows how many times that's happened in the last 24 years. So we're going to go ahead and just check that capacitor since the power's off. Just one easy thing to look at. When I go to pull my wires off the capacitor, I always use pliers. I recommend that you just kind of pry up when you're doing it. This way you don't have any loose connections when you go to put them back on. And the size capacitor that this is a 55 plus 5. It's hard to see with the GoPro there, but we're looking for that value. It may be a little more or a little less. That's kind of typical. The first value we see is on the capacitor side for the fan. That's 4.9. And the second value we see is the capacitor side for the compressor, which is 36. So it's obviously weak. But, you know, this thing could have been running this way for quite some time with that valve in that situation. So I'm just going to put everything back on and put it back in there and get the unit back up and running again. So far on the report we have 2 capacitors and an expansion valve, and it obviously needs a detailed cleaning. And there's some microscopic leaks on the evaporator as well. But, you know, the compressor had a pretty strong pumping ratio and had good stagnant pressures. They were equalized, so kudos to the compressor. Not surprised that this 24-year-old unit needs this much work. Was kind of shocked that you know, nobody knew there was any issues with it. They just wanted to know, hey, how's this unit doing at 24 years old? Unfortunately, we got bad news for you. And you can see the age of this equipment. You know, you can see the type of refrigerant. Again, we can see, you know, the size of BTUs. Old R22 Lennox heat pump. Because we're off and we're going to come back on, I always make it a good practice to just check that Inrush amp. I'm expecting it to be high because of a low capacitor and obviously a high compression ratio. So we're going to start up under a bigger load for that compressor. So I'm expecting to have a high start amp, but that contactor wasn't really pitted. So if it is high, I would still put on a start component at this stage of the game, but nothing that I would be too concerned about, like, hey, your compressor is dying, because that contactor would typically tell that story. So we're going to go and turn everything back on, and I'm looking for that Inrush amp. That Inrush amp is supposed to be less than 100. Okay, we can see there our LRA. And we're reading, that was 99 on that. So looking at the run amps, the run amps were under that value. All right, so I apologize about that. My GoPro got overheated from sunlight. So I'll work on that for you guys on that next video. But just to kind of cover, that was the end of the diagnostic. Basically, I took that Inrush amp that I thought was going to be high. It was high. When you do this for as long as me, it's very easy to get caught up on one thing and continue to talk about it to a customer, and you can easily talk yourself out of doing what the customer needs, right? Like, for example, you can sit there, if that customer was present and I was talking about, hey, this is a 24-year-old unit, it's got all these issues, they may be scared to put that money into it. But at the end of the day, this needs to be their decision, not my decision. I'm not the one paying for it. I'm just the one doing the work, whichever way they want to go. And so to conclude on this, we actually gave them a quote on replacing the equipment, and gave them a quote on if they were to fix it. And that's what we owe our community. What you decide to do is your choice. I'm going to leave up the values that we took, so you can just look at these images. I want you to think about that for a second and leave a comment below on what do you think, and there's no right or wrong. Should the customer replace the equipment, or should that customer fix that unit? Again, it's an R22. It's a Lennox heat pump, 24 years old, right here in Florida. Thanks. Stay tuned. Stay safe as always. And I hope this video helps you out.